Getting near the end of the second day. How's everyone doing? Enjoying the conference? Learning lots of good stuff? Some people are awake. That's good. All right, let's go ahead and get started. This is coding with XML. First of all, a quick introduction as to what we're going to be doing. This is on how to use XML with ColdFusion. This is what I consider to be a 101 course for XML. If you've already worked with XML before, the first half of this might be kind of boring, but no snoring. You know, sit tight, and we'll get to some other stuff that hopefully will be interesting. We're going to talk about real use for XML and programmatically how to create well-formed XML documents. So this is for you if you like ColdFusion. Does anyone like ColdFusion here? Wow, that was really weak. Everyone's pretty tired. I know I'm not giving away swag like everybody else, but you know, you can at least encourage me a little bit with some participation. All right, you need to know how to use structures and arrays. Hopefully that's something that is familiar to a lot of people here. And you hope to aspire greatly to actually dig into and start to use some XML. Quick background on who I am. I've been using ColdFusion since version 3. That's many years. Worked for a web development company for 9 years using ColdFusion as the primary development. And I am now currently the Chief Technology Officer at IXP Software. Some of you might know that because our commercial product is Fusion Docs, document management system built on ColdFusion. Okay, jumping right into this. What is XML? Wikipedia says this. It's a general purpose markup language. It's extensible because you can define your own tags. So we're not talking about a strict set of rules necessarily. And its primary purpose is to facilitate sharing data across platforms. Think of it in terms of it's a great way to package data that you're going to pass from one source to another. It is meant to be relatively human readable. Note the relatively. XML stands for Extensible Markup Language. And as I just mentioned, it's a standard for creating markup that describes the structure of data. It's been around for a long time. You use HTML, that's probably where you started. That's very much related to XML. So we're not talking about a foreign topic here. It looks very similar. It works the same way. We're just going to talk about ways to manipulate it and use it differently. However, this is not a history lesson. So if you want to know about the history of it, go to Google. Okay. In simplest form, an XML document, note the word document, it's a tree of nested elements. It has to have one root element, and everything else is nested underneath there, so it's a clean tree. They use tag syntax, just like HTML. You've probably seen a lot of flex while you're here this time around. MXML is just another flavor of XML. And elements contain other elements, attributes, and text. So in pseudocode, nobody yell at me for this not compiling or working right with their application, but this is the concept we're talking about here. Something that can contain other things that can contain other things. Everyone okay with that? Okay, the key I want to reiterate here is that XML is designed for storing just data. The benefit of this is that it forces you to separate it from the UI. Okay, this is good practice, not necessarily what people are used to doing with ColdFusion from day one, but it's a good idea to get there. And it is relatively human readable and portable between systems. Related technologies, I mentioned HTML. Also RSS. However you feel like defining it, there's many, many names for it here. Extensible style sheet language. We're not going to be going over that today, but that is another technology that's used to render an XML document into an HTML document. Web distributed data exchange. We'll be looking at a couple examples for that. And web services, which are a really easy way to encapsulate XML, and you really don't have to know anything about XML to use web services, but behind the scenes, everything is being translated to XML and back. I mentioned MXML as well. So where do we use it in every day? Web services and RSS is a daily thing for a lot of people. Electronic data interchange. Now this is an archaic term. Some of you older guys might know this term. It's essentially a way for saying defining a method for exchanging data between different systems that weren't necessarily designed to talk together. XML solves a lot of these problems, so that's why we're talking about this. If you work with e-commerce, you're probably very familiar with online services for rate lookups, for UPS, USPS, FedEx, if you're brave enough to deal with some of those. And one of my personal favorites, being able to store complex structures in files as well as database fields. Exchanging data with flash movies, reading and storing content for other systems. Okay, so a practical example of where you might consider using this, and I promise we'll get to code here. I don't want to put everyone to sleep with presentation stuff. So company X has an e-commerce website, orders are taken online, and that information has to get to a fulfillment house. And so it's logical with today's technology to be able to package that information and be able to send it off to them, because XML means you can define what the structure is, and most modern programming languages will allow you to convert it to something that makes sense to your language, and then convert it back. And this way you can exchange information, something that's very generic, and then the other person can use it as if it were a native object in their language. So it doesn't matter if you're talking .NET to ColdFusion to Java, anything else, this information can be exchanged seamlessly. So the goal in this scenario would be to maintain security and eliminate double entry. Solution is to push the orders from the website in XML format and import it into the fulfillment system. So it would look something like this, where the customer request is coming through the internet to the company's web server, which would be the green trace. And then the company web server is going to push back by the blue trace through the internet to the fulfillment company with XML. Again, relatively straightforward. Some terminology for you. Let's take a look at the anatomy of an XML document. For the most part, you're never going to have to care about this again, but it's good to know about it so that whenever somebody asks you, you don't give them a blind stare and go, what are you talking about? So prologue and body. The prologue is the very top. It tells you what type of document this is. The body is where it contains all the meat of what you're trying to pass around, which are elements, attributes, etc. So here's a quick example of an XML document. So as I was mentioning, human readable, this is not too difficult to understand what we're trying to encapsulate here. We've got a directory of people with employees, and for one employee, we've got the name and address information that's embedded within it. So the prologue is that very first line which tells us what kind of document it is, and the body contains everything else. So what is an attribute, an element, or XML text? Well, in blue, last equals Smith is an attribute. So that attribute name would be last, and the value would be Smith. An element has an opening and a closing tag. So in this case, includes street 1 and closing street 1. And XML text would be anything that shows up in between two different tags. Everybody okay with that? Next, we're looking at escaped reserved characters. In this case, if it was Arm & Hammer with just the ampersand, ampersand is a reserved character within XML. It would have to be escaped. So there are many characters, especially control characters, that certain systems will inject into it that you're going to have to make sure you programmatically replace so it doesn't break how an XML document will deserialize. And the C data block is simply a place where you can say the rules change, and in between it, everything is considered to be a literal. You see a lot of this when you're looking at MXML with Flex Builder. Okay, more terminology. A document type definition. This is a specific customizable document that'll tell you what rules an XML document has to comply to. As a general rule, you're not going to have to worry about this if you're writing your own XML applications. However, if you're going to work with somebody else's, this becomes really, really important, especially, as I mentioned earlier, the FedEx interface. Is anybody here actually integrated with FedEx in ColdFusion? See, this doesn't surprise me. Oh, there is one. Cool. Did you enjoy it? It's not simple, put it that way. ColdFusion is supposed to make our life easier. It just was not easier. Next terminology, well-formed. An XML document's well-formed if it adheres to all the rules for XML. It's important you understand these because we're going to have to be able to check documents to make sure that they match these things. So it's well-formed if it has no breaks in the rule set. And that means you're going to be able to deserialize it and actually put it to use. A document is valid if it is well-formed and also it adheres to the rules of its document type definition. Important note is that it does not necessarily have to comply to both in order for you to use it. So in a lot of cases, if you don't really care about the document type definition, you're just grabbing an XML document from some place and need to pull information out, you're not going to worry so much about their document type definition. You're just going to convert it into an object and pull some information out of it. And this defines serialization, the process of taking textual data. What we looked at on the screen before with the actual text tags, that's the textual version of an XML document. The process of taking that and turning it into something that ColdFusion can understand is called deserialization. And the process of taking an object and turning into its string representation is called serialization. I just want to reiterate that whenever you use web services, CF Invoke, it automatically does that behind the scenes. So the tags we're going to be, rather the functions we're going to be looking at here were defined ever since ColdFusion MX6, so you have plenty of time to learn them, especially if you're working with old software. And Blue Dragon actually has enhanced quite a few of these, so it's worth looking at if you are using Blue Dragon's technology. The basic functions we're going to be going over are these: XML new, XML parse, XML element new, XML search, and XML validate. So to get started here, we're going to jump into some code, and we're going to take a look at reading an XML document. As I mentioned earlier, we're going to read the textual version of this and turn it into something that ColdFusion can actually use. So let's go ahead and go into CF Eclipse. Okay, so read from file. Is that big enough for everyone? We need it bigger? No feedback. Is that just okay then? Is it perfect? All right. So what we're looking at here is a couple basic tags. The first one is a CF file, which is going to read a file off of the file system called sample.xml, and it's going to return it into a string value called strxml data. Let's go ahead and take a look at that XML file real quick. And so this is an order. This says what the order ID number is. It's got a customer name listed in there, as well as a list of items. So this would be kind of like what you would see from an order placed on an e-commerce website. So at this point, all we're doing is we're loading up into a string value, and then we're using XML parse with that string that we're pulling, and then we're going to dump it out to the screen. So we take a look at that. What we see here, CF dump is a very useful tool. Hopefully everyone uses it all the time. But what we see here is that this is turned into something that we can actually understand with a nice object hierarchy, okay? Now, very important to note that whenever you use XML parse and you get an XML object back in ColdFusion, this is just a collection of structures and arrays. So if you know how to use structures and arrays, you should be in great shape at this point. There's a couple nifty rules that we'll go through, but you really shouldn't have a problem being able to pull information out of here. And that's the nice thing about this. You take something that looks like this, that somebody gives you, and before we had these tools, you would have to use the mid function and do keyword searching and rip out strings, and that just is horrible and time consuming. And then if they change one aspect of this file, then you're in a lot of trouble again. So this is really nice. This dumps out what the structure of this looks like. Let's take a look at the next example, which is reading and displaying XML data. So what we're doing here is the same thing. We're pulling the same file, sample.xml, into a string. Then we're going to use XML parse to deserialize it into an XML object, which is called XML order. Now, I mentioned that XML documents have to have one root at the beginning. That one root at the beginning is called XML root. So you can see here we're referring to that. Here's XML order, the object that we created. Here's XML root, which goes to that first tag. And if we look at that, that would be pointing at this tag right here. And then we're going into a structure called XML attributes. So if you think about this, that's going to be pulling out this information right here. So XML attributes automatically populate a structure called XML attributes. That's lesson number one. Real easy to get this out. All you got to do is pass in the name of the attribute you want. It'll display it for you. We're going to be doing the same thing in the next level here. XML order, XML root, .customer. So go back and take a look at that. This time we're referring to something by name. XML root.customer, XML attributes, and lname. So we're going to follow that through. Here's XML root, here's customer, and there's the name. Actually, lname. So that's the attribute we're talking about. Is everyone with me? Okay, and then we're going to display the first name as well. Member ID, if we go back and take a look at this, same thing. Now, let's say we want to display the items. If we go back and take a look at this, items is its own element, which is closed down here, and contains all these additional elements. And those contain elements as well. So, if we go back and take a look at this code, we can see we can refer to XML order of the object, XML root, and then items, which is this right here. And then we're looking at the array called XML children. Anything that is a child element of its parent is going to be listed in the XML children array. And since you know how to work with arrays, you can apply any array function that you're familiar with in order to get the information out. So in this case, what we're doing is we're going to loop from 1 to the array length of that array, and we're going to use I as the index. This becomes helpful. I'm creating a local variable called xnitem, and I'm basically going to bypass all this syntax because I don't know about you, but it's going to start to drive me nuts if I have to retype that every single time. Okay? So we're going to point to this subindex I, which is what we're pulling here. And then we can simply do a loop of that information and pull out xnitem, which is our shortcut, attributes ID, xnitem.name. And here we're pulling out XML text. XML text is the variable right there. What's in between the two element tags? Okay? And the same for quantity and unit price. And when we look at that on the screen, that's what it looks like. So a whole lot more usable than our original XML code. Any questions on that? Yes? Which, the code? Yes.